I'm just watching here one of my videos, The Deserts Will Bloom, aka Our Bodies Will Regenerate in the Bathtub. Which actually is on my playlist devoted to The Deserts Will Bloom as well. I'm saying that water will migrate in the same direction that alkaline minerals will migrate when they're pumped with DC electricity. They move in one direction towards the electrode of their choice. The water will go with them, and that means all alkaline minerals, so not just sodium and potassium, but the metals as well, because they're positively charged as well. And it's the whole water molecule that will move, not merely a fraction of it, not merely the hydrogen ions. And the reason why I'm saying that is because water likes to adhere to metal. We know that already from Tesla's bladeless turbine, as I state in the video. But B, from my experience in dealing with my colon, I had fallen asleep with the positive bit up my butt and negative in my mouth. I think that was it. And I had fused, the electrode had fused to the interior skin of my rectum, and I had to use a Fleet enema bottle filled with water to rehydrate the rectum so that I could get the electrode out of me. It was stuck. And I felt very dehydrated and very withdrawn. I had gone into withdrawal. I'd fallen asleep, but when I woke up in the middle of the night, I felt very miserable, and I realized I was dehydrated. So I decided, well, I don't want to do this again. But it's making me think. Silver hydroperoxide is a water molecule in which one atom of oxygen is bound to it, along with one atom of silver displacing one hydrogen atom. So we have an added oxygen, but we've lost a little hydrogen and gained silver. And that means, according to this video, if what I'm saying is true based on my experience, which I forgot about, if metal and alkaline minerals flow in the same direction as whole molecules of water, then that means silver hydroperoxide will behave in a similar fashion. It's a whole water molecule which, actually it's not whole because it lost one hydrogen ion, making it a kind of a salt ion. Making it a kind of a salt. With water, though. See, that's the weirdness of it. Oh my God! Is that why water moves in the same direction as metals and alkaline minerals? Because water and hydrogen peroxide, because water is an expression of hydrogen peroxide. You know what I'm thinking? Our Earth is water-based, right? So we think water is the end-all be-all of everything, but maybe not. Maybe it's simply the more stabilized version of hydrogen peroxide. It's a degenerate version because it's the only stable version of hydrogen peroxide. But we don't understand water. We keep studying it and we think we understand it. We find out more things we never knew about it before. Maybe part of the problem is because we don't understand that water is a degenerate version of hydrogen peroxide, inasmuch as hydrogen peroxide is unstable, yet water is. And so it's the stable, degenerate version of hydrogen peroxide. But by adding silver to hydrogen peroxide, now it's gained some stability, yet it still is the more appropriate way of looking at water, analyzing the properties of water. Just because it's more stable doesn't make water the ideal case to study. actually hydrogen peroxide is the more interesting case study, because this property of adherence to a whole water molecule adhering to an alkaline mineral and a metal ion, or a metal particle for that matter, and then moving in the same direction when undergoing a DC current, doesn't make us think of water behaving that way, but does make me think of hydrogen peroxide bound to a metal behaving that way, or bound to a mineral, an alkaline mineral such as calcium peroxide. But when you put calcium peroxide in water, it breaks down and generates hydrogen peroxide along with calcium ions, because calcium, because calcium does not want to stay in solution. That's right. So calcium peroxide is actually an unstable, a non-stable version of a ionized form of hydrogen peroxide, unlike silver hydroperoxide, which is much more stable in water. It doesn't want to react and break down into silver ions and hydrogen peroxide ions. So this is an interesting situation, how we combine it with a mineral or a metal, combining hydrogen peroxide to formulate a compound that is either stable in the case of silver hydroperoxide or non-stable in the case of calcium peroxide. A reverse... you get my drift. It's playing with stability versus non-stability, but in the opposite direction. Something going in the direction of hydrogen peroxide instead of in the direction away from it, towards it. And this is really interesting. So we got two ideas here. That one, plus that hydrogen peroxide is the ideal case of water to study the properties of water, not water. Water is actually a special case of hydrogen peroxide because it's stable. And just because it's more in evidence doesn't make it more suitable for study. It just makes it more our tendency to study that than to study hydrogen peroxide. It's interesting because hydrogen peroxide is the ideal state, and it's the white blood cells. The body has to go to a certain amount of trouble to create it, and only based on need, because it takes energy, it takes work to create it, and the white blood cells do just that. They squirt it at pathogens before they gobble them up, and they also make use of DC electricity, kind of like an electric eel, to zap the pathogens, to weaken them, to be able to, before gobbling them up. So I wonder if electricity can alter water to turn it into hydrogen peroxide if oxygen is dissolved in water as well. I wonder if the white blood cells will give up an oxygen atom. I wonder how they make hydrogen peroxide. That's right, they would have to give up oxygen, wouldn't they? They'd have to be like scavengers for oxygen and then use it. That's right, if hydrogen peroxide would break down after it reacts with the pathogen, or even if it fails to react with it, liberating oxygen, the oxygen would go into solution, and so the white blood cells would have to want to soak up oxygen. Probably as a stable, oh my God, that's right. How would they stabilize it inside themselves? It couldn't be calcium peroxide because it's a liquid medium, both inside and outside the white blood cell. It would have to use some other means of stabilizing hydrogen peroxide. Maybe sodium hydroperoxide, potassium hydroperoxide, something with a valence of 1, or maybe silver. You know, Becker alluded to the possibility that regeneration can occur with the blood. We don't need the dermis of the skin or the pericardia surrounding the heart. But there's not enough substantiation to that evidence, yet there is some to Dr. Pramod Vora on his website, space-age.com. And so I think Becker was onto something. He just didn't feel comfortable. He was very conservative when it comes to making claims. He didn't like to stretch his neck and make a claim that he didn't really know for certain was true. But I like to stretch it. And looking at Pramod Vohra's photo documentation, I've already come to the conclusion that besides the bone marrow, besides the dermis of the skin, and besides the pericardia surrounding the heart, the blood can also create stem cells. But I didn't know from which cell, and it looks like it's from the white blood cells, because they're going to contain the some kind of hydroperoxide bound to an alkali of a valence of 1. Whether it's sodium and potassium, that means that they could just as easily soak up silver. And if they soak up silver hydroperoxide, that means that the blood now has become surcharged with the ability to regenerate the body, to provide stem cells to the body. That means that we don't need to supply silver to the skin to somehow get it to the dermis. We don't need a wound, as Rosemary Jacobs kept wanting to push onto me, that, you need a wound. You can't just drive silver ions into the dermis across the epidermis. It's not going to happen. That's what the epidermis is there for, to protect the dermis from such assault of anything, silver included. And then that makes it difficult for Argyria to leave the dermis because the epidermis is getting in the way. But if we can supply silver ions in the form of silver hydroperoxide to the bloodstream, that means the white blood cells will be able to soak it up, because they're soaking up probably some other variety of hydroperoxide, such as sodium hydroperoxide, to use it, to have it in reserve, to squirt it out at pathogens when it needs to by somehow displacing the sodium ion with a hydrogen ion, and then quickly squirt it out. Or squirt it out in combination with some kind of compound that would have an affinity for sodium, to strip the sodium ion away from the sodium hydroperoxide. I'm assuming it exists, so that the sodium will be stripped out of it and it will become hydrogen 2, oxygen 2, fully reactive hydrogen peroxide. Maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe pathogens will react with sodium hydroperoxide or silver hydroperoxide. In any event, regardless of the mechanics, which nobody has studied yet, or I haven't read about, let's put it that way, it's probably out there, the mechanics of how white blood cells operate with hydrogen peroxide in conjunction with pathogens. But the question here is whether or not white blood cells would uptake. What kind of affinity would they have for absorbing silver hydroperoxide? And I think it would be very high. And I think they're the ones who cause regeneration, stem cell tissue to occur by morphing themselves into a stem cell, if they have silver nutrition. And if they can operate with a hydroperoxide of some alkali of a valence of 1, such as silver or sodium or whatever, then they would be capable. Then that means the body is set up to absorb a hydroperoxide of some alkali of a valence of 1. So what I've discovered now is exactly what the body hungers for, and nobody knows it yet. Rosemary Jacobs says, no, there's no such thing as silver as a nutrient. You know what? I think she's right. But silver hydroperoxide might be a different affair. And who goes around creating the stuff to ingest it? So she has a point. I guess I'm going to have to send her an email and agree with her, but with that caveat that there is a variety of silver that we might have an affinity for, along with sodium and potassium. And that's because it has a valence of 1 and can react with hydrogen peroxide and nourish the white blood cells in a way that is beyond their mere duty to kill pathogens, but to also turn themselves into stem cells if there is a need for that somewhere in the body. So you see, I'm going to have to send her a link to this video, plus a little byline, because I think I've stumbled on something here. The reason why, to argue with somebody like Rosemary Jacobs, the reason why silver is a nutrient, not by itself. And so Rosemary Jacobs would be right in that sense. But in conjunction with hydroperoxide, she may be wrong. It may indeed, silver may indeed be a nutrient. I already know that, but how do you argue with somebody like Rosemary Jacobs who doesn't want to believe you? Because the scientists say, the nutritionists and the scientists say, no, silver's not a nutrient, it's a poison, and you don't want to ingest it because you're going to get Argyria. Not if the body can create hydrogen peroxide to turn the silver into a safe ion that the body can deal with, because nitrate ain't going to work. I've figured that part out. Sulfate is not going to work. Just about all of the salts of silver are not going to work because they're unstable, and when they break down, they burn the tissue and embed the silver particle that comes out of that non-stable salt version of ionic silver. It will embed silver into the tissue and burn it, because you'll be left with either the nitrate or the sulfate or whatever acid it is, non-paired with the silver ion. Since the silver came out of solution, it came out of its ionic state, the acid will burn the tissue and make it possible for that silver particle to embed itself in the burn. And so actually Argyria, victims of Argyria, are burn victims. But it's in the dermis that the burn has occurred, not in the epidermis. So if we want to cure somebody of Argyria, we have to see them as a burn victim and treat them as such. But a burn that has been capped by a healthy epidermis. Oh boy. But hydrogen peroxide is the key to understanding this, to understanding Argyria. I think I'm going to post this on that, because I've already started to, on that video, the Oprah Winfrey video of Dr. Oz visiting her, and they're both interrogating Paul Carusone before he died. And Dr. Oz says that Argyria is permanent. I claim that it's not, and I made a comment to that effect. And this is a further elucidation of why, the mechanics of why Argyria is not a permanent condition. It's simply a pathological burn condition of the dermis, capped by a healthy epidermis above it. And whatever tissue is below the dermis, that also being in a healthy state. So it's only the dermis that's burned, yet it's capped on both sides, above and below, by a healthy tissue, and that's why the body fails to heal it, fails to take out the silver. So we need a healthy white blood cell count to cure ourselves of Argyria. And whatever does that will probably help. I find that electricity helps, because I find that electricity helps fight an infection. If I've got a fever, all I have to do is pass weak DC current through the body. And if it's too much voltage, no problem. I can pass it through my legs, up one leg and down the other. Put an electrode pad under one foot and put the other one under the other foot, so that one is the anode, the other is the cathode. Safely pass current that would otherwise not be safe to pass across the heart or the brain, and instead pass it just up one leg and down the other through the crotch area as the junction point between them, and it will surcharge the bloodstream and the lymphatic system passing through the legs. And if I do it for several hours, my whole body will get such a charge not only will I overcome the infection, but my digestive system will get a boost, along with my immune system. And I learned that by using the Contour. It's a machine that causes your abdominal muscles to contract, so you can build the abdominal muscles without having to do sit-ups. So I used it in a different way. I used it across my legs because I realized this stuff, the machine, if you overextend your use of it, there's a certain program in the machine so that you can run it for like 26 minutes. And you just have to keep turning it on every 25 or whatever minutes that program runs for. And I run it only on the conditioning mode, which is below 10 cycles per second. And so the muscle twitches rather than contracts because you don't need a high frequency. All you need is all you need is the current. But because it is a DC current, but it's pulsed. It's not a non-pulsed. And of course, Becker told us to stay away from pulsation. And so that's why I don't use that machine anymore. I just make my own DC current machine circuits out of voltage division circuit with a single AA battery, and thus I avoid the risk of incurring cancer at a later date. But I can make my own circuit, and I can make a safe, low amperage, high voltage circuit for immediate or intermediate use, episodic use across the entire body from head to foot, and to alleviate a fever. I haven't had a fever yet, though, to try that. Well, actually, no, I had a microvolt, microamp circuit. That's what I had. It was microvolts and microamps. So you don't need high anything. Just a DC current circuit, and go to sleep with it, and it'll bring down the fever. So it's obvious the white blood cells get a charge. But what do they do with the charge? They probably create sodium hydroperoxide. It boosts their reserve so that they can use it as a hand grenade of sorts to squirt out at pathogens. And being that it's a peroxide of a sort, it can react with the pathogens. It doesn't have to be hydrogen peroxide, which of course would be non-stable and not much use to the body. But a sodium hydroperoxide could be more useful to the white blood cell and still do the job to fight pathogens in the bloodstream. You see where this is getting to me? It's amazing. We just think about this and how it can generate more thoughts of hypothetical conclusions that could be how the white blood cell operates, and why silver hydroperoxide is just a variation on sodium hydroperoxide to a very useful degree. But it means that we have to have a healthy white blood cell count, which means we have to have a body that is surcharged with electricity and capable of generating electricity sufficient to take Argyria out of the dermis and cure itself of Argyria. And I know it can. I've seen it happen on myself, and electricity is the easiest way to make it happen. And if electricity, I wonder if you can create hydrogen peroxide with electricity. I don't know. That's something I don't know. We know that the white blood cells make use of both electricity and hydrogen peroxide in killing pathogens. That would kind of lend the idea that electricity and hydrogen peroxide is related, and that Argyria can be cured not merely by electricity but by hydrogen peroxide as well. And it's the white blood cells who will do the job if they can reach the Argyria. That's the other problem. Can they reach it? Or, here's the ticket. Cells are specialized, all right? The brain cell is not the same as a liver cell, but we know the DNA is the same in all of them. We know that a cell can turn into a stem cell and thus de-differentiate its specialization and turn into another cell of a different specialization. Yet, if all of that is possible, we also know that the thyroid gland has a specialized need humongously for iodine. I forget which form it's in. I think it's in the ionic iodide form. In any case, regardless of which form it's in, the diatomic iodine that's highly reactive or the monoatomic ion of iodide, it has a huge affinity for it, but that doesn't mean that all the other cells of the body don't have an appetite, just not to the same degree as the thyroid gland tissue. Dr. David Brownstein has already told us this. All the cells of the body need it, which means we have to take in more than the minimum daily adult requirement. We have to take in 1,000 times more, because that's how much the government has told us will saturate the entire body to prevent the body from becoming ill if we had nuclear fallout of radioactive iodine in the atmosphere. 1,000 times more. And the Japanese in the city Japanese take in 100 times more than the minimum daily adult requirement. And the coastal Japanese we don't even know because they've never been measured. But they probably take in more because they have a lot of access to a lot of seaweed. But the seaweed is high in the diet of the Japanese anyway, and just probably not so much in the city dweller as in the coastal Japanese. But they have 100 times more nutritional intake of iodine than would we if all we took in was the minimum daily adult requirement. So they are less susceptible to breast cancer or cystic fibrosis of the breast tissue than the American woman is, because they take in more iodine. So, like that, quite possibly the white blood cell has a greater affinity for silver than other cells of the body. Yet, if they lose their ability to generate electricity and fight infection, they may lose their ability to act as carriers for silver, to carry it around the body in a bioavailable format of silver hydroperoxide, thus displacing some of the sodium hydroperoxide that they probably carry around or generate or both anyway to fight infection. And as carriers, that means they are carriers of potential regeneration. Wait a minute. We are told by science that stem cells are only created in the bone marrow. And yet, what does the bone marrow create? Blood cells. Hello? There's a little parallelism going on here, besides between electricity and hydrogen peroxide, between white blood cells and stem cells. You see where I'm getting at? There are a lot of allusions here, a lot of parallelisms, just aching to be investigated, if they haven't been already. And I bet, for the most part, most of these parallelisms that I'm making have not been. Or else we have regeneration as a standard in the medical profession. We don't. We're told it's not standard past the age of 10, which means we have no hold on it. Oh, it's 50 years away. Because we don't study Becker. We don't give him credit either. So that people won't look into his research. It's 50 years away in the past. It's buried. It's frozen. We're frozen in our study. We don't want to move ahead because we don't study Becker. I study him, and so I make all these conclusions based on my experience. And just thinking about it and talking about it with you guys and gals on YouTube, it helps me think about it even more so, in a more extensive sense, to come up with more hypothetical conclusions, to dream about. My God, there's so much here. The subject material of Becker is rich in fertilization and fertilizing our minds to come up with more stuff and material than we could possibly imagine. All we have to do is dive headfirst into his material and get involved. And the rest is automatic. It's unbelievable. And not keep it to ourselves. This is how we fertilize our brain, by talking about it, by sharing it with others, so that our brain can make more out of it, get more mileage out of it. The teacher learns more than the student. So my sharing with you helps me come up with this stuff, or else I wouldn't be able to. I don't just sit around and dream up this stuff. I can't. I don't have the ability. But when I'm talking with you, it really, I do have the ability, actually, on my own. But this enhances it. Talking enhances that ability. To be inspired, to come up with more material, to connect A with D when I never maybe considered that. All I considered was, how does A connect with B? And so I connected with another point of Becker's data and come up with even more material. And this is just awesome. To really locate where regeneration occurs. Where is it really seated in? Not an organ tissue that has a location in the body, such as Becker discovered, the dermis and the pericardia. But in a cellular function that has no specific target in the body because it moves around. It's mobile. Yet it comes out of the bone marrow. The same place that stem cells come out of. Can you beat that? Good old white blood cells. So this tells us that red blood cells are not the only cells that have an affinity for oxygen. White blood cells do also. Because they got to make hydrogen peroxide to fight pathogens. They just use it differently. They don't share it with the cells of the body in the same way that red blood cells do. Red blood cells will share oxygen as a gas so that the cells of the body can be oxygenated and carry on their metabolic or anabolic function to oxidize calories and generate energy. But the white blood cells share oxygen in a different way, in the form of hydrogen peroxide, so that the other cells of the body, not just the white blood cells, can fight infection as well as the white blood cells can. So you see, the ability to fight infection may be a specialization, as we like to think of it, of the white blood cells of the body. But any cell of the body can fight infection if it's given the right materials to do so. And that is an electric charge so that they can generate hydrogen peroxide of their own, and not just the white blood cells generate it, so that the tissues can fight infection. Because how is the white blood cell going to reach a cancer cell? The blood doesn't reach the cancer cell necessarily. It does in a sense, but I believe that, I've always suspected that cancer starts because of toxins in the lymphatic system and pathogens such as parasites or other stuff such as viral infection. And the white blood cells can't go there to help fight that infection, and it turns into cancer. An infection of a very specific type, a cancerous type. So not only is it based on my hypothesis that the white blood cells can't reach the tissues outside the bloodstream, but the tissues are not functioning at their optimal potential. And not just them, but the white blood cells as well. Immunity across the whole physiology is not functioning up to snuff, as we like to say, or I like to say, or the British might want to say, using a British idiomatic expression, up to snuff. Anywho, so this is a very interesting set of inspired hypotheses, which tells us so much about how regeneration can function in a body that is fully geared to regenerate. Fully geared, not just partially, not just wimpily, not just vestigially in a potential state. Oh shit, we don't regenerate anymore, darn it. Wish we could. This is like cells of the body talking to each other, We don't even think about it. But I'm sure the cells do. They're probably aching to regenerate, to remake the body, because that's their dharma. It's their duty. Our duty is to satisfy our desires. Our body's duty is to regenerate so that we have a body that lives long enough so that we can satisfy all of our desires and not die with regrets or resentment. Oh, I wish I had done that differently. Darn it, I'm not going to get an opportunity to do that again because I'm old, worn out, and ready to die. You see? So when the body fails to do its dharma, we can fall into the trap, the sand trap, of not being able to fulfill our dharma as well, simply because our lives are so short. This is the byproduct of living in the Kali Yuga, in a state of ignorance, in a state of a-dharma, the lack of dharma. So then not only do we not fulfill our dharma, but our body does not as well, which compounds the problem, making it a catch-22. A negative feedback situation, compounding the problem, making it worse than it already is. You see? This is how bad off we are. But this is the mechanics of how, if it should get better, why, on the level of the physiology, why it would get better at focusing on the white blood cell. And its specialized functionality of dealing with hydrogen peroxide, apart from any consideration that the rest of the physiology, the cells of the body, may also be capable and want to be handle the metabolism of a hydrogen peroxide molecule and deal with it to fight infection on their own, not just the white blood cells. It just makes it advantageous to have a mobile cell, such as the white blood cell is, to turn into a stem cell. It's very advantageous. But it doesn't mean that stem cell formation is relegated merely to the white blood cell. Far from it. All the cells of the body would probably love to be able to turn into a stem cell if they could. So apparently, according to Becker's research, he only studied the dermis and the pericardia because he studied wounds. He didn't study the blood. Of course he wouldn't. But he knew the possibility. There was some... He made an allusion to it in his book because there was some evidence. It just wasn't enough to substantiate it from his point of view. So it shows that all the cells of the body could turn into stem cells. Every single one. If the whole physiology is functioning at optimal potential and fulfilling its dharma to provide us with an infinitely long lifespan. Forget the DNA and the telomeres. This all has to do with turning into stem cells. It has nothing to do with the failure to age, which is what the telomere study has to do with. It has to do with the ability to replace a cell if it gets worn out and degenerate and is no longer functional. Hey, just push it aside and replace it with something better. Why not? It's a different way of looking at it. Why not? Automatically, without any need for us to get involved, but apparently we do, because we don't regenerate spontaneously. So, this is a whole area line of research for regeneration of the entire physiology and trying to bring it up to snuff. But it's an extension of Becker's research in an area that he didn't go in particular because he just studied wound care. I studied whole body care for chronic debilitation, aging process, accelerated by the antifreeze and parasites, and a congenital defect at birth of having a weak immune system and a weak digestive system. And so I was prompted to get into Becker, but he never studied chronic care, and he certainly never studied the blood. That much, at any rate, or at all. I can't remember where he got that allusion to, that he made a mild allusion to the possibility of blood creating stem cells. I'm not sure. He might have been simply quoting somebody else, which meant it would have been a later chapter, beyond his first 12 chapters, I would suspect, when he gets into a really rich quotation of other people's work. Anywho, I think I've spoken enough on this topic, way over my 10 minutes. Can't put it on YouTube, but it is. I definitely will put a short video to link to the draft that I will put on my foreskin regeneration site, foreskinrestoration.org website, which is holding all of these videos that I can't put on YouTube for one reason or another. There you go. This one's worthy of posting right away. I have a bunch of others that I haven't processed yet, but this one doesn't need processing. It just needs to be posted, and then a linking video to link to it, because this is awesome. This is unbelievably awesome. Wow.